Thank you, Mr. President, fellow senators. House Bill 139 is about modernizing the cosmetology and barber law to reflect how our economy functions and to support the type of services people desire and need. This is a bill that reduces regulatory burdens for practitioners. While there are different moving parts within the legislation, there is a common thread: getting the right people in the right place and in the right way to do the work that they are qualified to do. This bill combines the Idaho Barber Law and the Idaho Cosmetology Law to combine the Board of Barber Examiners and the Idaho Board of Cosmetology into a single board to regulate the barbering, barber styling, cosmetology, and electrology professions. This legislation allows for the transfer of education between professions and will facilitate efficiencies in licensing and oversight. The current mission statements of the two boards are to help safeguard the public health, safety, and welfare through licensure and regulation of the associated professions. I would like to first highlight some of the updates in the cosmetology licensing law, and then I'll give some background on the why behind this legislation. First, on page 3, line 17, there's a new definition for event styling, which includes the application of cosmetic products and the arranging of customers' hair for events, including but not limited to weddings, dances, parties, and recitals. On page 4, line 28, we add a definition for thermal styling product. On page 5, line 47, and continuing down, there's an exemption from licensure, which is provided in section 545805, and it exempts those persons who are employed or contracted to perform barber styling, cosmetology, or aesthetics in the course of and incidental to the production of a theatrical or visual arts production. And it exempts those persons whose practice for compensation is limited to event styling. It also, on line 5 of that same page, exempts employees or owners of a business that offer thermal styling equipment for sale at retail. This measure also proposes to reduce the required hours of course instruction for a cosmetology license from 2,000 to 1,600 hours, which you'll find on page 8, lines 23 and 27. Also proposes to reduce the hours of course instruction for electrology from 800 to 600 hours. And it does allow for reciprocity in licensing for cosmetologists to become barbers, and it allows the board to write rules to allow for a barber to become a cosmetologist. It also lowers the bond amount for schools from $25,000 to $20,000, which is on page 14. And it allows, on page 16, section 545820, allows the board, if they so choose, to retroactively reinstate a license within 90 days of payment of the renewal if the licensee is otherwise in good standing. I know many of you have heard from constituents from across the state on both sides of these issues, but I want to take a moment to share some of the reasons and stories behind these proposals. First, on the event styling. You may not be aware, I know I wasn't before getting into this issue, but Idaho has a growing film production industry for which we as a state have granted a tax credit. We have a booming destination wedding industry. In McCall alone, there's over 10 weddings a weekend during the summer, not to mention Sun Valley, Coeur d'Alene, and the many other beautiful destinations throughout Idaho where people choose to be married. And we also have a burgeoning fitness competition industry. I was not aware of this either, where these types of services are needed. What all of these industries have in common is a need for makeup artistry and hairstyling services on site and outside of a salon. Unlike some other licensed occupations, licensed cosmetologists are tied to a licensed facility and are not legally allowed to practice their craft outside of that facility. The event styling exemption is proposed to change that. The other proposed exemption related to event styling would allow non-licensed makeup artists to also offer event styling services outside of a licensed facility. These artists have other training and education outside of the traditional cosmetology schooling. Mr. President, may I read from an email from Mrs. Jessica Armstrong addressed to me dated March 22nd, 2017.
Having identified the source, the senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. I worked for MAC Cosmetics, where we were educated in the art of makeup application. MAC trains some of the best makeup artists in the world and is a leading authority in the makeup industry. All MAC employees spend a week in extensive training learning about face and eye shapes, skin types, ingredients, sanitation, textures, and color theory. After initial training, MAC holds seasonal trainings to keep all employees fresh, on trend, products, sanitation, application, and each artist's individual certifications. We receive certifications in basic application, tattoo covering, runway, and editorial makeup. We continue our education by having clients of all ages, races, and sexes. I have had more hours of training in makeup than any licensed cosmetologist, and my work can speak to that. I'm often hired by licensed cosmetologists. I don't feel that I should be required to get a cosmetology or aesthetics license to apply makeup. It's a 2,000-hour education with only 90 hours of makeup. Half of that is textbook only, not application. It says, I'm not interested in either of those professions. I did plenty of research before opting out of education in those licensed professions, knowing full well that what I wanted to learn wasn't provided in those classrooms. Makeup schools worldwide do not offer a license, just a certification, knowing that the career is not chained to a salon. It's on movie sets, fashion shows, and other production events. I have certifications and would like them to be acknowledged as they are in other states in this country. That's the end of the email. One of the other significant changes is the reduction of educational hours required to become a licensed cosmetologist from 2,000 to 1,600 hours. The effort in Idaho to reduce the hours of education goes back to 2011. At that time, 32 states had lower hours than Idaho. That number has now increased to 47 states that have lower hour requirements than Idaho. Cosmetology in Idaho was first regulated in 1929, and the 2,000 hours required to be a cosmetologist has been in effect since that time. That was almost 90 years ago. To refuse to recognize how technology has changed education and continue to have students with up to $5,000 more in student debt than is necessary isn't prudent. This month, Forbes had an article on how lowering the hours specifically in cosmetology school will lead to less student loan debt. Lowering the hours will still provide for the necessary training and education and will also allow individuals to enter the workforce sooner. The last thing I wanted to point out is something that the good senator from District 16 brought to my attention. On page 7, lines 33 to 36, is language similar to the language that we rejected when we saw the bill for licensed dietitians. The language is punitive to licensees. I believe this language may be embedded in many of our occupational licensing laws, and I'm committed to working with the senator from District 16 to address this issue. Thank you, Mr. President. Debate is open.